He offered her an umbrella in the rain. He didn't know she could change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain had started sometime in the early hours, a slow, steady rhythm that tapped against the window pane like a soft warning. Elias Grant stirred to the sound of it, blinking against the gray light filtering through threadbare curtains. Across the room, Lily was already awake, her tiny form bundled beneath a mess of blankets, hugging a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "You're going to be late," she mumbled, her voice still thick with sleep. Elias swung his legs over the side of the bed, rubbing the back of his neck. "And you're getting too smart for your own good." She grinned and burrowed deeper into the covers as he moved to the kitchen, bare feet padding over the cold linoleum. The fridge hummed its tired tune, mostly empty aside from a half carton of milk and 2 eggs. He cracked them into a pan, watching the sizzle as he poured the last of the orange juice into a plastic cup with a cartoon dinosaur on it. Routine. Familiar. Barely enough. By the time they stepped out the front door, the rain had picked up. Elias flipped up the collar of his worn work jacket and held the umbrella over Lily as they walked toward the car, a rust-speckled Corolla that coughed twice before starting. She sat in the back, legs swinging, the hem of her jeans damp already. "Lunch?" he asked. "In my bag." "Homework?" "Done." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Gloves?" "Lost one. I'll just keep my hands in my pockets." He exhaled. "We'll look for it tonight." The streets glistened with slick puddles, traffic slow as they inched toward the school. He pulled up to the curb and leaned back so he could see her face. Her hair was tucked under a pink knit hat, one ear poking out. "Love you, Peanut," he said. "Love you more." She shut the door behind her, dashing toward the entrance under the awning. Elias watched until she disappeared inside, then sighed and checked the time. 23 minutes to get to the garage. He had a transmission job waiting, a leaky roof above his workbench, and 2 overdue bills stuffed in his glove box. Rain drummed steadily overhead. Another day, another storm. The rain had turned from steady to relentless. A cold, punishing downpour that blurred the edges of the morning and soaked through jackets in minutes. Elias flicked on the windshield wipers as they thudded back and forth, barely keeping up with the sheets of water cascading down the glass. His thoughts were already ahead. Tool orders, the stubborn alternator in the Ford pickup waiting at the shop, and whether he could stretch what was left in his bank account past Friday. As he slowed at the light near 7th and Maple, something caught his eye. A woman was standing at the bus stop with no umbrella, her coat clinging to her like it had surrendered hours ago. She wasn't panicking or flailing, just standing there, arms wrapped around herself, chin tucked to her chest. There was a certain stillness to her, like she had been waiting far longer than she should have. The light stayed red. Elias glanced at the passenger seat. His umbrella lay there, worn but working. One of its spokes stuck out a little at the corner, but it did the job. He hesitated. The light ticked down. Traffic hadn't moved. Before he could talk himself out of it, he pulled over. He stepped out into the rain, boots splashing in the gathering puddles. The woman looked up, surprised. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheeks, and her eyes, green, striking even through the fog of water, met his for a moment. "You look like you need this more than I do," Elias said, offering the umbrella. She blinked as if unsure he was talking to her. Thank you, but, He pushed it into her hands gently, already turning back toward his car. "No worries. Stay dry." Before she could protest again, Elias had jogged back across the street, rain soaking through his jacket almost instantly. He slid into the driver's seat, dripping, and pulled away just as the light turned green. The woman stood there staring after him, umbrella now shielding her from the rain he no longer had cover from. She didn't know his name, and he didn't know that this moment, this 5-second act of decency, would be the start of something neither of them saw coming. Sophie Langston sat beneath the wide canopy of the umbrella, its crooked spine giving it a slight tilt to one side, but it held. The rain hammered down around her, but for the first time in over an hour she wasn't soaked. Water still dripped from the tips of her hair, her coat clung to her arms, and her boots squelched every time she shifted her weight. But the cold sting of being forgotten by the world had eased. She watched the man disappear into the flow of traffic, windshield wipers flapping as his old sedan faded into the gray. He hadn't asked her name, hadn't looked at her like she was fragile or out of place. He just helped. Sophie pulled the umbrella a little closer. The gesture was so small, yet it hit harder than it should have. She was used to people wanting something, an endorsement, a deal, a moment of her time in exchange for their own gain. But this stranger had handed her the only thing keeping him dry and walked away without a second thought. The bus arrived 10 minutes late, hissing to a stop. She climbed aboard, offering a polite nod to the driver, then settled near the back, umbrella resting across her lap like something sacred. As the bus rattled down the wet streets, Sophie found herself staring out the window, not at the blur of buildings or the people hurrying under awnings, but at nothing in particular. She should have asked his name, thanked him properly. But it had all happened so quickly. Her phone buzzed, a reminder, board meeting at 10. She'd be late, but that hardly mattered now. The thought of stepping into a boardroom full of polished suits and hollow smiles felt more exhausting than ever. Sophie glanced down at the umbrella again, her fingers lightly tracing the fabric. Maybe it was silly the way she kept thinking about it, but something about the moment lingered, quiet, honest, and disarming. She tucked it away in her mind, a small thread woven into the day. She didn't know his name, didn't think she'd ever see him again. But life had other plans. The sky was dark by the time Elias pulled into the narrow driveway. The rain finally reduced to a drizzle that clung to the windshield like mist. The old Corolla gave a tired wheeze as he turned the key, a metallic rattle from under the hood that made him wince. Something in the engine was loose, maybe the belt, maybe the timing chain. Either way, it was a problem he didn't have time or money to fix. He sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, the ache in his shoulders settling in deeper now that the garage was closed and there was no one left to pretend for. The hum of the dashboard lights flickered once before going dark. He sighed, opened the door, and stepped out into the damp evening. Inside the house, the warmth hit him like a blanket. It wasn't much, just an old space heater in the corner and the faint scent of spaghetti from the night before, but it was home. Lily's voice drifted in from the living room, singing quietly to herself as she colored at the coffee table. "Hey, Peanut," Elias called softly as he stepped out of his boots. She turned, beaming. "Hi, Daddy. I saved you a cookie." He smiled, even though his chest tightened. "Yeah? Lucky me." He walked over and ruffled her hair before heading to the kitchen. The counter was covered in unopened mail. He sifted through it, slipping the bright envelopes to the back. Electric, water, rent, all stamped with their quiet warnings in red and gray. He tucked them behind the toaster, out of sight for now. "Guess what?" Lily said as she followed him in. "Mrs. Danner said I get to be the snowflake in the school play." "That's perfect," he said, crouching to meet her eyes. "You'll be the best snowflake they've ever seen." She grinned, satisfied, then skipped off to draw more on the back of a cereal box. Elias turned to the sink, washing his grease-stained hands under water that didn't get quite hot anymore. He stared out the window, past the cracked glass, into the wet stillness of the backyard. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt it heavy in his bones. They were holding it together by threads. And every day those threads frayed just a little more. The gates of the Langston estate opened with a slow mechanical groan, their iron frames slicing through the fog like something out of a forgotten dream. Sophie sat in the back of the black town car, watching as manicured hedges and stone fountains blurred past the tinted windows. The house, or rather the mansion, loomed ahead like a monument to a life that had always felt borrowed. Grand, flawless, cold. As the car rolled to a stop beneath the arched front entry, two staff members emerged wordlessly to open her door. Sophie stepped out, heels clicking against polished marble, her damp coat pulled tightly around her shoulders. The umbrella, the one given to her by the stranger, rested on the seat beside her, its frame still bent, a reminder of something unpolished, something real. "Welcome home, Miss Langston," the butler said with a nod. She forced a smile. "Thanks, Everett." Inside, the mansion was pristine, too pristine. Every surface gleamed, every piece of art hung just so. No signs of life, no fingerprints, no imperfections, the kind of place where silence echoed and warmth felt like an illusion. Her father was waiting in the study, as he always was after any unplanned detour. Richard Langston stood by the tall windows, dressed in one of his tailored suits, a glass of scotch in hand, though it wasn't even noon. "You're late?" he said without looking at her. "There was a delay," Sophie replied, dropping her coat on the armchair. "The rain." He turned finally, eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. "You have a driver, for a reason." "I wanted to be on my own today." He studied her as if trying to detect something dangerous in her voice. "You have a name, Sophie, one that means something. You don't get the luxury of being on your own." She said nothing. She'd had this conversation too many times. "We've got dinner with the Madsons tomorrow night. Bryce will be there. His family's expanding their tech division. We should discuss alignment." The word made her stomach twist. Alignment. Merging legacies. Arranged futures disguised as business strategy. "I'm not a deal to be made," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "Don't be dramatic. You were raised for this." Sophie looked around the gleaming room, at the fireplace that never burned, the crystal vases that never held real flowers, raised for this. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure she wanted any of it. Later that evening, Sophie sat alone in the solarium, the soft hum of distant jazz drifting in from the wireless speakers overhead. The glass ceiling above her trembled gently with the rain, each droplet a soft echo against the night. She had changed into silk loungewear, bare feet tucked beneath her on a cream-colored chaise, but the comfort did little to ease the weight in her chest. The umbrella rested beside her, drying awkwardly against an antique side table. One of its ribs jutted slightly outward, bent just enough to give it character, a flaw her father would have tossed without hesitation, but she couldn't bring herself to move it. That stranger, soaked and smiling, had handed it over like it was nothing. No strings, no expectations, just kindness. She replayed his face in her mind. Gentle eyes, unshaven jaw, hair damp and curling slightly at the collar. Tired maybe, but not bitter. The sort of man who carried the weight of 1,000 things and still had space to give someone shelter in the rain. Sophie had spent her entire life surrounded by polished words and plastic generosity. She knew how to smile during fundraisers, how to speak 3 languages at a board meeting, how to identify someone's net worth by the way they shook her hand. But none of it had ever felt real. None of it had warmed her the way that small, fleeting moment at the bus stop had. That man, she didn't even know his name, had offered her something she hadn't realized she was starving for: sincerity. She thought about the way he'd turned back toward his car without waiting for a thank you, how he'd braved the rain without a second thought. No condescension, no recognition of who she was. Just a stranger, being good for no reason other than it was who he was. Her phone buzzed, a calendar reminder for brunch with the Madsons. She dismissed it without a second glance and leaned back against the cushions, gaze drifting to the shadows outside. 2 lives. 2 worlds. His, grounded in struggle but filled with something achingly human. Hers, luxurious and empty all at once. And for the first time, Sophie wondered if everything she'd been taught to want was worth what it had cost her. The engine stuttered once, then again, and died with a low groan as Sophie guided her sleek white coupe to the shoulder of the road. She cursed under her breath, gripping the wheel as the dash lights flickered like a dying heartbeat. Outside, the sky hung heavy and overcast, the air thick with the smell of impending rain. Of course it would break down here, she thought. Middle of nowhere, no cell service, no driver. She'd insisted on taking this solo trip to clear her head against her father's warnings. "You're not built for rural roads, Sophie," he'd said with a sigh. "What happens when something goes wrong?" Apparently this. She popped the hood, climbed out carefully in her ankle boots, and braced herself against the growing wind. Heat hissed out in a puff of steam, and the complex machinery under the hood looked more like a personal betrayal than a technical failure. Sophie had no idea what she was looking at. A pickup rumbled past without stopping, then silence again. She sighed, rubbing her arms against the chill and taking a slow look around. That's when she spotted the small building at the edge of the gravel road, a modest garage with a crooked sign that read, "Grant's Auto." The door was open, the lights inside a little dim, a figure hunched over a lifted car. Reluctantly, Sophie closed her hood and made her way across the lot. She stepped inside, her heels clicking faintly against the oil-stained concrete. "Excuse me," she said, voice cutting through the clatter of a dropped wrench. The man looked up, and for a beat, nothing moved. His face was familiar, the strong jaw, the warm eyes, the grease on his hands. He straightened slowly, wiping his palms on a rag, gaze steady as recognition flickered across her own. "You gave me your umbrella," she said, almost breathless. His lips lifted into a quiet smile. "Looks like you're stuck in the rain again." Sophie laughed softly, more out of disbelief than humor. "I think fate has a sense of irony." Elias tilted his head, studying her. "Pop the hood. Let's see what we're working with." And just like that, the world narrowed. 2 people, 1 broken engine, and a second chance wrapped in the smell of motor oil and something else she couldn't quite name. Elias leaned over the open hood, brow furrowed, as he examined the maze of components beneath it. The engine hissed softly, still releasing the last of its heat. His fingers moved with practiced ease, checking the wiring, tapping a few connections, quietly muttering under his breath like the car might actually listen. Sophie stood a few feet away, arms crossed, more from the strangeness of the moment than the chill in the air. Up close, he looked the same as he had that rainy morning. Tired eyes, hands calloused, but careful. An ease about him that felt untouched by the world she came from. But here in his element, with the scent of oil and steel around him and the rumble of classic rock playing faintly from a battered radio, Elias Grant somehow seemed more solid, more real. She hadn't recognized him at first. The rain had blurred everything that day, and she hadn't looked twice. But now, watching him work, hearing the calm in his voice, she was certain. "You're really good at this," she said. He glanced up, offering a modest shrug. "Comes with doing it long enough." "Do you remember me?" she asked cautiously. Elias tilted his head, wiping his hands on a rag. "From earlier today, yeah." "No, I mean from last week, the bus stop. You gave me your umbrella." He paused. A moment passed. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her face, then widened just enough to betray the surprise. "That was you?" She nodded, a little sheepishly. "I didn't realize it was you either, not until you smiled." Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I'll be. Small world." A brief silence fell between them, heavy in the best kind of way, 2 people connecting over a thread neither of them expected to find again. "Well," he said finally, bending back over the engine, "looks like your ignition connector's loose. Nothing serious, but I'll need about 20 minutes to get it back together." Sophie nodded, a smile curling at the corners of her lips. "Take your time." Elias didn't ask who she was, didn't pry. And Sophie didn't offer it. For now, she was just a woman with a broken car and a memory of kindness, standing quietly in the garage of a man who had no idea she was the daughter of one of the wealthiest tycoons in the country. The rain returned slowly, as if the sky was deciding whether to cry again or hold back just a little longer. It drizzled soft and steady, tapping against the garage roof like a metronome for the quiet hum of Elias's work. Sophie sat just outside the bay door, perched on an overturned milk crate, the scent of damp earth and motor oil swirling in the air around her. Elias crouched beside her car, tools clinking faintly as he loosened a corroded clamp. He worked with a quiet focus, not rushed, not showy, just steady. Sophie watched the way his hands moved, precise and sure, like he'd done this 1,000 times. "You always this calm under pressure?" she asked, voice light. He glanced up with a faint smile. "Comes from fixing more things than I could afford to replace." She nodded, hugging her arms around herself. "I grew up thinking everything broken had to be thrown away. Cars, relationships, even people sometimes." Elias paused, looking at her differently now, not like a customer, but like someone he understood. "And now?" "Now I think I was wrong," she said, her voice quiet. "Some things are worth fixing." He didn't say anything right away, just turned back to the engine, the rain still whispering above them. Sophie let the silence settle between them, not awkward, just present. It was the kind of silence that let you breathe. "I've got a daughter," Elias said suddenly, voice low but steady. "Lily, she's 7, smart as a whip, obsessed with space, thinks she's going to build a rocket out of cardboard and duct tape one day." Sophie smiled. "She sounds amazing." "She is," he said, and there was pride in it, not the kind you wear like armor, but the kind that anchors you when everything else is slipping. "What about you?" he asked, wiping his hands. "What do you do when you're not stranded in the rain?" Sophie hesitated. The truth wasn't simple. "I work in the family business, mostly behind the scenes. Not nearly as interesting as building rocket ships." "Still counts," Elias said. "Does it make you happy?" She looked at him, really looked, and shrugged. "I don't know yet." And for some reason saying it out loud didn't feel like weakness. It felt like relief. The next day the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening under a weak afternoon sun. Sophie hadn't planned to come back, not really. But something about that garage, about Elias and his quiet steadiness, pulled at her like a thread she couldn't quite let go of. She pulled into the lot just as Elias was locking up, wiping his hands on the same oil-stained rag she'd seen yesterday. He looked up, surprised but not displeased, his expression softening when he saw her. "Car trouble already?" he teased. Sophie shook her head, smiling. "No, just passing by." A voice piped up from the office behind him. "Daddy, you promised I could pick the snack today." Sophie glanced toward the open door as a little girl came bounding out, freckle-faced, gap-toothed, with a galaxy of marker stars drawn on her arm and a backpack that looked like it had seen a few playground wars. She stopped when she saw Sophie, eyes wide and curious. Elias gave a small, sheepish shrug. "This is Lily," he said. "My daughter." Sophie knelt slightly to meet Lily's gaze. "Hi, Lily. I'm Sophie." Lily tilted her head. "Are you the lady whose car made the whiny dragon noise?" Sophie laughed. "That's one way to describe it." "She looked really fancy," Lily said to her dad. Clearly not whispering, but not mean fancy like the ladies at the grocery store who yell at the cashier. Elias groaned softly, rubbing his temple. "She's honest. Can't do much about that." "I like her," Lily said with a nod of finality. Sophie felt something warm bloom in her chest, something unexpected, tender. "I like you too." Lily beamed, stepping forward to tug on Sophie's hand. "You want to see my rocket drawing? It has fire and wheels, just in case it has to land on a mountain." "I'd love to," Sophie said. As they disappeared into the office together, Elias watched them with a quiet smile, tugging at the edge of his mouth. It wasn't the plan, none of it was. But seeing Sophie laugh with his daughter, really laugh, felt like the start of something he hadn't dared imagine in a long time. By the time Sophie and Lily stepped back outside, the sun had dropped lower, casting the garage in soft amber light. Elias was already tidying up, coiling cords, wiping down his workbench with methodical care. The easy conversation inside still lingered in Sophie's mind. Lily had shown her 6 rocket drawings, all of them wildly imaginative and utterly charming. For the first time in what felt like weeks, Sophie hadn't checked her phone once. She approached Elias, her heels clicking softly against the concrete. In her hand, a slim leather wallet. "I never properly thanked you for fixing the car," she said, her tone light but deliberate. Elias didn't look up right away. "Didn't expect you to," he replied, casually dropping a wrench into a drawer. "Well, I want to." She pulled a folded check from the wallet and held it out between them. "For the repair. And your time." Elias finally turned, eyeing the check but making no move to take it. "You already said thank you." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "And this is how I say it again, with actual money." He wiped his hands on a rag, then leaned back against the workbench, crossing his arms. "It wasn't a big job, Sophie. Loose connector, 10 minutes of work. If I charged everyone who stopped in for something that small, I'd lose half the town's trust." She hesitated. "But I can afford it." "I know." He smiled, gently, not condescending, just sure of himself. "That's not the point." Sophie stared at him, check still in hand, caught between admiration and confusion. "You could have charged me triple, and I wouldn't have blinked." "Yeah," Elias said simply. "But then I'd have to look Lily in the eye tonight and explain why I stopped being who I am." The words hit harder than she expected. Slowly she folded the check and slid it back into her wallet. "You're something else, Elias Grant." "I just fix cars," he said with a shrug. "No," she said quietly. "You remind people that not everything comes with a price tag." He didn't answer, just offered her a lopsided grin as he wiped his hands once more. And in that moment, Sophie realized how rare it was. Someone who didn't want anything from her. Someone who simply chose to be decent. It unsettled her in the best possible way. Sophie sat on the terrace outside her suite, legs curled beneath her, a laptop open in front of her that she hadn't touched in over an hour. The sky over the Langston estate was clear, but her mind was clouded with thoughts of oil-stained hands, honest eyes, and a little girl with stars on her arms and big dreams in her heart. She hadn't been able to shake them, Elias and Lily. The warmth of that tiny garage. The way Elias had refused her check like it cost him nothing. In her world, favors were currency and kindness usually came with a footnote. But Elias had made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Grounded. Still, she'd seen it in the edges of his smile, in the wear on his clothes, in the worry that flickered across his face when Lily wasn't looking. He was struggling. Sophie picked up her phone and scrolled to the contact list until she found a name she hadn't used since her last charity event. Madeline Wynne, executive assistant. She hesitated, thumb hovering. She didn't want to investigate Elias. She wasn't trying to dig up secrets. She just wanted to help, quietly, carefully. She pressed call. "Miss Langston?" Madeline's voice came crisp and professional on the first ring. "Hi, Maddie. I need a favor." Off the record. A pause. "Of course. What do you need?" "There's a garage out in Riverbend. Grant's Auto. Small place, one mechanic, name's Elias Grant. I'd like you to run a light check, public records only. Just see if the business is behind on anything. Utilities, lease payments, things like that." "May I ask why?" Sophie hesitated. "He helped me. He didn't know who I was, didn't care. If there's a way to help without making it a spectacle, I want to do that." Madeline didn't press further. "I'll look into it and send you a summary." "Quietly," Sophie added. "Please. He's not someone who would take well to handouts." "I understand." After she hung up, Sophie stared at the screen for a long while. It felt strange, this urge to do something without strings attached. But maybe that's what Elias had sparked in her. Something better. Something honest. And for once, she didn't want to overthink it. She just wanted to do the right thing. The bell above the garage door jingled as Elias stepped inside, shoulders damp from the morning mist and arms heavy with the weight of another sleepless night. The shop was quiet, too quiet. No clients waiting, no calls on the machine, no buzz of opportunity in the air, just the low hum of the fridge in the office and the faint tick of the wall clock marking time he couldn't afford to waste. He dropped his toolbox near the workbench and sat down hard on the old metal stool, rubbing a hand over his face. The stack of bills he'd shoved into the bottom drawer a week ago was still there, growing thicker. Power, water, insurance, and now rent. As if summoned by the thought, the front door creaked open again, this time followed by the sharp, heavy steps of his landlord, Frank Holloway, starched shirt, clipboard in hand, eyes like cold stone. "Morning," Frank said in the tone of someone who didn't care how the morning actually was. Elias stood slowly. "Frank? We're past due, Elias. 30 days. He glanced around the shop like he was already imagining it emptied out. "I gave you time, but it's the end of the line." "I just need another week," Elias said, calm on the outside, panic crawling under his skin. Frank sighed. Not cruel, but not sympathetic either. "You've been a good tenant, but I've got someone else interested in the property. A real buyer. Cash." Elias didn't speak, didn't argue. He just nodded. Frank left the same way he came, in control. Alone again, Elias leaned against the counter, staring at the chipped paint on the cabinet door. He knew what was in his wallet, maybe enough for gas and groceries. And Lily's inhaler? Almost empty. The prescription refill had been sitting at the pharmacy for 3 days now, out of reach at $92 he didn't have. That night, back home, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing space robots with crayons. She looked up, cheerful and oblivious. "Daddy, can we go to the library tomorrow? I want to get a book on real rockets this time." Elias smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sure, Peanut. We'll figure it out." Because that's what he always said, even when he didn't know how. Elias arrived at the garage just after sunrise, the sky streaked in soft gold and pale blue. It should have felt like a fresh start, but his chest was tight with the weight of what today was supposed to be, the day he handed over the keys. He fumbled with the lock, pushing open the heavy garage door and stepping into the silence that had become too familiar. He didn't even bother flipping on the lights at first. What was the point? Instead, he walked to the office and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one where all the late notices lived, the one he avoided like a bruise that wouldn't heal. Except the envelope from Holloway Properties was different this time. Smaller, thinner. Curious, Elias tore it open and pulled out a crisp, single-page notice. No red stamps, no threats. Just a line of clean black ink. "Your outstanding balance has been paid in full. Your lease is now current through the end of the quarter." He read it twice, then a third time. "What the hell?" he whispered. He flipped the paper over, checked the envelope again. No return address, no signature, no check stub, just the words, "Paid in full." Elias sat down hard in the worn office chair, the paper still in his hand. He didn't understand. He hadn't borrowed money. No one owed him favors. And Frank? Frank didn't just forget to collect. A client, maybe? A friend? He tried to think, who would have even known he was behind? He didn't like the feeling it stirred in him. Gratitude tangled with discomfort. He'd worked so hard to keep things afloat on his own, to show Lily that even when life pressed hardest, you stood on your feet. Still, the relief crept in like warmth in winter. He wasn't losing the garage, not today. That meant groceries. That meant rent at home. That meant Lily's medicine. That meant breathing again. He sat back in the chair and closed his eyes, paper still clenched in his hand, unaware that miles away, in a corner suite she never liked, Sophie Langston sat quietly, with her phone in her lap. An unread message from her assistant confirming the payment had gone through. No name attached, no credit expected, just a gesture, just a start. The sky was clear when Sophie returned to the garage. But the weight in her chest had only grown heavier. She'd rehearsed the conversation a dozen different ways, different openings, different tones, different explanations. None of them felt right. None of them sounded like the truth without also sounding like betrayal. Elias was under a hood when she arrived, his shirt streaked with grease, sweat clinging to his brow. She waited by the entrance, hands clasped tightly, heart pounding harder than it should for a man who had no idea who she really was. He looked up after a moment, blinking against the light. "Hey," he said, wiping his hands. "Wasn't expecting to see you again this week?" Sophie offered a faint smile. "I know. I needed to talk to you." Elias studied her for a second, then nodded. "Give me a minute." He finished tightening the last bolt, closed the hood, and rolled his shoulders as he approached. "Car trouble again?" "No," she said quietly. "Something else." They stepped into the office, the air inside tinged with coffee and engine oil. Sophie took a breath. "I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you decide what to think of me." Elias's smile faltered. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, waiting. "My name is Sophie Langston. My father is Richard Langston. He owns Langston Holdings, the real estate, the auto chain, the foundation, all of it." The silence that followed was immediate and sharp. Elias blinked once. "Langston? As in Langston Auto?" She nodded slowly. "I didn't lie. I just didn't say it. I wanted you to see me as I am, not the name behind me." He looked away, jaw tightening. "So you're, what, slumming it to feel normal for a few days?" "No," she said, stepping forward. "I didn't plan any of this, the umbrella, the car, meeting Lily. I didn't expect any of it. But after the garage, after you helped me, after you said no to money like it meant nothing, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about you." Elias exhaled, slow and hard. "You think I wouldn't have helped if I'd known who you were?" "No," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I think I wouldn't have known how much it meant if you had." His expression was unreadable now, guarded, unsure. And for the first time, Sophie didn't try to fill the silence. She just stood there, waiting to see if what they'd started could survive the truth. Elias didn't say much after Sophie's confession. Just nodded once, a clipped gesture that felt more like a retreat than acceptance. He went back to the car he'd been working on, head down, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the bolts as if tightening them could hold everything else in place. Sophie lingered a few steps behind, her presence quiet but heavy. She didn't push, she didn't try to explain again. Some things had to settle on their own. Still, the silence between them felt like a door, slowly closing. "I didn't come here to play games," she said softly. "I just wanted to be seen, not by the world, but by someone real." Elias paused, jaw tight. "And now I know who you are, Sophie. That changes things." She flinched at the way he said her name, measured, careful, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to speak it any more. "Why?" she asked. "Because I have money? A last name that doesn't fit into a small-town life?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he wiped his hands on a rag, still not looking at her. "Because I know what happens when people like me get close to people like you." She wanted to protest, to say she wasn't like the others, wasn't like her father, but he wouldn't believe that right now. She could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened whenever she stepped closer. "I didn't ask for this line between us," she whispered. "Neither did I," Elias said, "but it's there." Sophie's chest tightened, the ache of it far worse than she'd prepared for. She nodded slowly, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "Then I'll go." He still wouldn't look at her, but he didn't stop her either. She turned and walked away, the sound of her heels softer than usual, like even they didn't want to make noise in this moment. When she reached the door, she glanced back once. He stood with his back to her, wrench in hand, fixing a car that couldn't possibly matter more than this conversation, but maybe for now it had to. And so, for the first time since they met, Sophie Langston left the garage not with hope in her heart, but with distance between them, and the fear that it might stay that way. The envelope was small, folded unevenly, and sealed with a star-shaped sticker that had lost most of its stick. Sophie found it in her mailbox 3 days after she'd left the garage, tucked between sleek white invitations and thick corporate packets. It stood out, not just because of its simplicity, but because of the name scrawled on the front in pink crayon. To Miss Sophie, the Rocket Lady. She smiled before she even opened it, her fingers careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a sheet of notebook paper, lines crooked with enthusiasm and covered in brightly colored handwriting. Dear Miss Sophie, hi, it's me, Lily. I wanted to say thank you for looking at my rocket pictures and saying they were cool. Most grown-ups don't care. My daddy says I'm going to build something amazing one day, and I believe him, but it's nice when other people say it too. We're doing a play at school next Friday. I'm the star, not like Space Star, but the singing kind. I want you to come. You don't have to dress fancy. Daddy doesn't know I'm writing this. He's been kind of quiet lately. Anyway, I hope you can come. I saved you a seat in the front row, second from the left. It's the best spot. Love, Lily Grant, a future astronaut. Sophie held the letter in her hands for a long moment, heart caught somewhere between laughter and tears. It was the purest thing she'd received in months, maybe years. No motive, no agenda, just a child's belief that kindness mattered. And even though she knew Elias likely wouldn't want her there, not now, not after everything, she also knew she couldn't stay away. So, when Friday came, Sophie walked into the small auditorium of Riverbend Elementary wearing jeans and a soft navy sweater, her hair pulled back simply. She ignored the curious glances from parents, the awkward stares. Her eyes scanned the rows until she found the seat, second from the left, front row, right where Lily said she'd be. When the curtain rose and Lily stepped onto the stage in a silver star costume with glitter on her cheeks and a beaming smile, their eyes met. Lily waved, boldly, excitedly. Sophie waved back, her heart aching in the best possible way. Behind her, a familiar figure entered the back of the room quietly, arms crossed, jaw tight. Elias had come too. He hadn't seen the letter, but the moment he spotted Sophie in the front row, he knew exactly who had sent it. By Monday morning, the rumors had spread like spilled oil on pavement, quick, messy, and impossible to clean up. Elias walked into Millie's diner for his usual black coffee and half-hour of quiet before the shop opened. But this time, the regulars didn't nod at him the way they usually did. Heads turned a little too fast when he entered. Conversations hushed. He could feel it in the air, tight and heavy, like humidity before a storm. Millie poured his coffee with a too-sweet smile, her words clipped. "You want your usual, Elias?" He nodded, but her eyes flicked toward a group of retirees in the corner, whispering behind hands and half-eaten pancakes. He didn't have to guess. Someone had seen Sophie at the school play. Maybe they recognized her from the papers, or maybe they just saw the way she'd smiled at Lily and how Lily had smiled back, like they were already something close to family. It didn't take much to stoke the fires in a town like Riverbend. By lunchtime, 2 customers at the garage had canceled appointments. By closing, a third asked outright, "So you dating that Langston girl now? That the plan? Trade up from busted carburetors to a corporate penthouse?" Elias froze mid-reach for a wrench. "Excuse me?" The man shrugged, laughing like it was a joke. "Hey, I don't blame you. Some guys get lucky. Just don't forget who your real friends are when you're cashing in." Elias didn't respond. He just turned back to the engine, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He'd worked years to build trust in this town, fixing cars at cost, helping people who couldn't pay, running weekend tune-ups for seniors, and now, because one woman with a powerful last name had shown up at a school play, people looked at him like he was a con artist with a wrench. That night, as he tucked Lily into bed, she asked, why were people at school saying Miss Sophie is a princess? Elias paused. Because some people care more about money than who someone really is. Lily looked up at him, confused. But she's nice. He smiled faintly. Yeah, she is. But in a town this small, kindness wasn't always enough to protect someone from the weight of someone else's name. The Langston estate felt colder than usual when Sophie returned, its towering ceilings and polished floors echoing with a silence that wasn't quite peaceful. Her heels clicked through the marble foyer like they were betraying her presence, and every step toward her father's study felt heavier than the last. Richard Langston didn't look up when she entered. He was seated behind his desk, fingers steepled, a legal pad in front of him filled with notes in his unmistakably rigid handwriting. A single glance at his expression told her this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a directive. "I assume you've enjoyed your time away," he said without greeting. Sophie stayed standing. "I've had time to think." Richard finally looked up, his mouth twitching into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thinking is fine, Sophie. Wandering off to play small-town fantasy with mechanics and their children, that's something else entirely." Her stomach tightened. It wasn't a fantasy. He leaned back in his chair. "Then what would you call it? A rebellion? A distraction? You have a legacy to maintain, a future that's been carefully structured for you." "Structured by you," she said, voice firm. "You've been seen," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "at a public school play, sitting next to working-class people, as if that's your world now. Do you realize what that does to our image, to your reputation?" "My reputation?" she echoed. "Or yours?" Richard's eyes sharpened. "Let me be clear. The Madsons are expecting an answer. Bryce is prepared to make the engagement public at the quarter-end gala. His family is expanding into southeast markets. The alignment would be beneficial." "For you," Sophie said, "not for me." "It's not about you, Sophie," he said flatly. "It's about the Langston name, the empire we've built. And you jeopardize that every time you choose emotion over sense." She stared at him, the words landing like frost. "So Elias is a threat now? A man who helps people for free and raises a daughter with more kindness than I've seen in this entire house?" Richard's voice dropped, cold and final. "He is not your future." Sophie didn't reply. She just turned and walked out of the study, the silence this time louder than any argument. And yet, as she climbed the stairs, heart pounding with defiance, she knew something for certain. Maybe her father had built an empire, but she was done living in its shadow. It was just past noon when the black car pulled up outside the garage, sleek, spotless, and completely out of place among the pickup trucks and rusted sedans that usually filled the lot. Elias stood at the workbench, hands deep in an oil filter, when he saw the door open and a man step out. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Elias's monthly income. He didn't need an introduction. Richard Langston. The man walked into the garage like he owned it, eyes sweeping the space with detached disapproval. Elias wiped his hands slowly on a rag, posture calm but alert. "You must be Elias Grant," Langston said, voice smooth and sharp like glass. Elias didn't offer his hand. "That's right. Something wrong with your car?" "No," Langston replied, "but there's something wrong with your judgment." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Langston stepped further in, eyes narrowing. "You've been spending time with my daughter. That ends today." Elias leaned back against the counter, arms folded. "Sophie can decide who she spends time with." Richard's lips curled into something that might have been a smile in another man. "Let's not pretend this is something noble. We both know what this is. A man with a struggling garage and a daughter to feed sees an opportunity. A woman with power, access, money." Elias's jaw tensed, but his voice stayed steady. "You don't know a damn thing about me." "I know enough," Richard said. "I know the look in a man's eyes when he sees a ladder out of the hole he's dug. I've dealt with your kind before." Elias stepped forward, slow and deliberate. I don't need your daughter's money. I don't want her name. I didn't ask her for anything. But she showed up when no one else did. And if you think waving your checkbook around is going to scare me off, you're in the wrong town." There was a long pause, the hum of tools and traffic the only sound between them. "You're making a mistake," Richard said finally. "Maybe," Elias said, "but at least it'll be mine." Langston studied him one last time, then turned without a word and walked out, the heels of his shoes echoing across the concrete. Elias watched the car pull away, heart pounding. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but one thing was certain, he wasn't backing down. The notice was taped to the front door when Elias arrived the next morning, an official-looking document stamped with bold red ink and a sharp-edged authority that made his stomach twist before he even read a word. Notice of code violations. Immediate compliance required or subject to closure. Elias ripped it from the glass, scanning the lines with growing disbelief. Faulty electrical wiring. Improper hazardous waste disposal. Structural weakness in the garage ceiling. None of it made sense. He knew his place wasn't perfect, but he'd kept it clean, safe, up to code. Always. The door creaked open behind him, and Troy, one of his long-time customers and part-time volunteer, stepped inside with a cautious look. "You see it?" Troy asked, nodding toward the paper in Elias's hand. "Yeah," Elias said tightly. "It's garbage." "I heard someone from the city was out here yesterday," Troy added. "Didn't even talk to you. Just walked around, took photos, wrote stuff down." Elias's mind reeled. He hadn't had an inspection in over a year. No notice, no call. Just this, suddenly and conveniently, after Richard Langston's little visit. He tossed the paper under the workbench, jaw clenched. "This isn't about safety. This is about pressure." "You think it's her dad?" Troy asked quietly. Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. Everything about the timing, the wording, the complete lack of process, it all pointed in one direction. He looked around the shop, the tools neatly stored, the lift still working, the patch in the ceiling he'd fixed himself with borrowed scaffolding and grit. He thought of Lily sitting on the counter with her space books. Of Sophie, her laugh echoing off the walls like it belonged there. And now, all of it, his livelihood, his last tether to stability, was hanging by a thread knotted in the hands of a man with too much power and too little conscience. By noon, clients had already started calling to ask about the notice. By dusk, 2 jobs had been canceled until things got sorted. And by nightfall, Elias sat alone in the office, staring at the walls as if waiting for them to close in. For the first time in years, he didn't know if he could fix what was broken. And that terrified him more than anything. The Langston Foundation's annual gala glittered with the usual precision, crystal chandeliers glowing like halos, champagne flutes never empty, and conversations floating above the hum of a string quartet. Sophie stood at the edge of the ballroom in a sleek navy gown, her expression unreadable as she watched the room move without her. It was a perfect performance, as always, except tonight. She wasn't playing her part. She spotted her father near the center, surrounded by donors and board members, nodding and laughing with the same polished charm that had carried him through decades of ruthless business. When his eyes finally found hers, there was a flicker of warning behind them. Too late. Sophie stepped forward and gently took the microphone from the event host just as he was about to introduce the next speaker. The chatter dimmed. All eyes turned. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear, steady. "I know I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight, but I have something important to say." Richard Langston shifted slightly, his smile thinning. "For most of my life, I've been known as Richard Langston's daughter. I've sat at the tables, memorized the numbers, worn the dress, played the part, and I was proud of it for a long time." A quiet ripple moved through the room, but somewhere along the way I realized that legacy and control are not the same as love and purpose, and building an empire doesn't mean building a life. Her gaze found her father's, and for a moment they were just father and daughter, no empire between them. "I've decided to step away from the Langston Group," she continued, breath catching only slightly. "Effective immediately. I will no longer serve as an executive or representative in any capacity. I need to build something of my own, something honest, even if it's small, even if it's fragile." The room was dead silent. She smiled a little sadly. "Some things are more valuable than stock prices. Like integrity, or the people who show up when they don't have to. I won't trade that for polished floors and private jets." She set the mic down gently and walked off the stage, heels clicking with finality. As she passed her father, he didn't stop her. For once, he knew he couldn't. Sophie didn't look back. She didn't need to. She was finally walking forward on her own. The sun had barely begun to set when Elias heard the familiar hum of Sophie's car pulling into the garage lot. He didn't look up right away, just kept working beneath the hood of an old Chevy, jaw set, heart already pounding in his chest. He'd seen the headline earlier that day. "Langston Heiress steps down in surprise, public announcement." He hadn't needed to read the article to know who she was talking about. She stepped into the garage, heels clicking softly against the concrete, wearing jeans and a windbreaker instead of a gown, but her presence still lit up the space. Elias finally stood, wiping his hands on a rag, eyes shadowed. "You saw it," she said quietly. "I did." Sophie took a step closer. "I meant what I said, every word." "That's the problem," Elias replied. "You meant it." She blinked, startled. "You're mad." "I'm not mad, Sophie. I'm stunned. You walked away from everything, your career, your future, your family's legacy." She crossed her arms, her voice tightening. "That was my choice, not yours." "You shouldn't have to give it all up for me," he said, louder now. "I'm just a guy with a half-broke garage and a kid who still draws rocket ships on the walls." Sophie's jaw tensed. "You think I did this for you?" Elias looked at her, something vulnerable flickering behind the frustration. "Didn't you?" "I did it for me, Elias," she said, stepping forward. "Because I'm tired of being told who to love, who to become, and what my worth is measured by. You just happen to remind me what real looks like." He turned away, hands on his hips, shoulders rising and falling with the weight of it. "You don't know what it's like down here, Sophie. When people see you with someone like me, they don't think it's love. They think it's charity, or a phase, or a lie." She swallowed hard. "And what do you think it is?" He looked at her then, raw and uncertain. "I think it's terrifying, because it feels like everything I ever wanted, and I don't know how to deserve it." Sophie stepped closer, her voice softening. "Then maybe we figure it out together." But Elias didn't move, didn't reach for her. And Sophie, heart aching, nodded once, then quietly walked back out into the fading light, unsure if he'd ever come after her. The next morning was unusually quiet at the garage. Elias worked in short bursts, never settling into a rhythm, distracted by thoughts he couldn't shake. Sophie hadn't called, hadn't texted. He wasn't sure if he expected her to, or if he deserved it if she did. Lily sat cross-legged in the corner office, markers scattered around her, tongue sticking out slightly as she concentrated on drawing a new version of her rocket, this one with glittery wings and tiny stick figures inside. One of them had long hair. Elias peeked in from the garage bay. "You about ready to go, Peanut?" "Almost," she called. "Just got to finish one more." He walked in and leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. She was humming, completely unaware of the storm he was carrying inside. Without looking up, Lily asked, "Daddy, can Miss Sophie come with us to the library today?" Elias cleared his throat. "I don't know, sweetheart. She's probably busy." Lily paused, her marker mid-stroke. "Is she mad at us?" "No," he said gently. "She's just figuring some things out." Lily was quiet for a moment, then glanced up at him with those wide, impossibly honest eyes. "Is she going to be my new mommy?" Elias froze. The question hung in the air, innocent but piercing. She said it with the soft, matter-of-fact tone only a child could have. No agenda, no fear, just a hope she hadn't learned to guard yet. He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her tiny knee. "Lily, that's not something we can answer right now." "But she loves us," Lily said simply. "She smiles when I talk, and you look happy when she's around. That means she's family, right?" Elias's throat tightened. He pulled her into a hug, pressing his chin against the top of her head. "I love you more than anything in this world, and no matter what happens, that's never going to change." Behind them, the office door creaked softly. Sophie stood there, holding a bag of pastries and a cup of coffee. She hadn't meant to overhear. She hadn't even meant to walk in. But Lily's voice, so clear, so sincere, had stopped her cold. She looked at Elias. He looked at her. No one said anything. They didn't need to. Sometimes the smallest voices asked the biggest questions. The community center wasn't grand. The paint on the walls was chipped in places, the floors creaked when you walked down the old hallways, and the heater rattled like it had been on its last leg for years. But there was warmth here, the kind that couldn't be bought or built with marble floors. Sophie stood just inside the entrance, a clipboard in her hands and her name written in block letters across a paper badge. Volunteer. Sophie L. It felt strange not to have a last name that turned heads. Strange but right. Miss Carla, the director, was giving her the tour, pointing out the food pantry in the back, the after-school tutoring room, the donated clothing shelves, and the tiny office crammed with files and mismatched furniture. "You sure you're good with all this?" Carla asked with a curious smile. "We don't exactly have private chefs or luxury chairs." Sophie smiled, rolling up the sleeves of her soft flannel. "I didn't come here for comfort." Carla gave her a long, appraising look, then nodded. "You can start in the food pantry. Boxes need sorting. Deliveries go out twice a week. It's not glamorous." "I'm not looking for glamour," Sophie said. "Just something real." And that was the truth. She spent the rest of the morning stocking shelves, lifting boxes, and organizing donations. Her back ached by noon. Her nails broke. She ruined a perfectly nice pair of boots. And she felt more like herself than she had in years. During lunch, one of the teenage volunteers, a sharp-eyed girl named Tasha, asked, "You're not from around here, are you?" Sophie shook her head. "Not really." "You dress too nice for this place," Tasha said, grinning. Sophie laughed. "Give me a week." She stayed late that day, cleaning up after a messy art class that had left more glue and glitter on the floor than on the projects. As she turned out the lights and closed the door behind her, she felt something unexpected. Pride. Not the kind that came with a title or a press release, but the kind that lived deep and quiet in the chest. She wasn't Sophie Langston, heir to a legacy. She was Sophie, starting over, and finally building something that was hers. Elias wasn't sure when the shift happened. Maybe it was the morning Sophie showed up at the garage with Lily's favorite granola bars and a borrowed book on constellations. Or maybe it was the third time she picked up a broom without being asked, sweeping dust from the shop floor like she belonged there. He hadn't told her she did. But he also hadn't asked her to stop coming. She never pushed, never pried. Just showed up, some days with coffee, others with stories from the community center or drawings Lily had left in her car by accident. She talked less about her past now and more about the things right in front of her. The kids she tutored, the elderly woman she helped find winter boots, the dented cans she sorted on shelves. Elias watched her move through it all with quiet grace, and something inside him softened, reluctantly but undeniably. One afternoon he found her sitting cross-legged in the office with Lily, helping her build a rocket ship out of recycled boxes and duct tape. Sophie had glitter on her cheeks, tape stuck in her hair, and a look of pure joy on her face. Lily was giggling, holding a paper flag that read, "Team Grant Langston Mission 1. Elias paused in the doorway, taking it in. "You're getting glue on the payroll reports," he said. Sophie looked up, grinning. "Your daughter said it was an emergency launch?" Lily beamed. "We're going to space." Elias shook his head, but the smile tugging at his mouth betrayed him. Just don't set fire to the office." Later that evening, after Lily was asleep in the back room with a blanket and a stuffed rabbit, Sophie stood by the open bay door, arms folded, as the cool night drifted in. "You're good with her," Elias said, joining her. Sophie glanced at him. "She makes it easy?" He nodded slowly. "So do you." It wasn't a grand apology, wasn't a sweeping gesture, but it was something, a quiet opening, a step toward trust. And for the first time in a long while, Elias let it happen, not because he had to, but because she'd earned it. The rain came hard and fast, not like the gentle spring showers Riverbend was used to. This was heavier, relentless sheets that turned gutters into rivers and sidewalks into streams. By mid-afternoon, the town was already on edge. Streets closed, power flickered, emergency alerts blared across phones like a drumbeat of warning. Elias didn't hesitate. When the first call came from Troy, his truck dead in a flooded intersection, Elias grabbed his coat, tools, and jumper cables. When the second came from Millie at the diner, water rising fast in the basement, he didn't stop to think. He threw a portable pump into the back of his truck and headed out. By the time he reached the outer edge of town, water was lapping at tires and windshields. The sky was a flat, colorless gray, thunder grumbling in the distance like something restless. Back at home, Sophie stood at the window, watching the rain blur the streetlights. Lily sat curled on the couch behind her, clutching her stuffed rabbit, worry etched plainly across her face. "Is Daddy okay?" she asked softly. "He's helping people," Sophie said, her voice calm, but her hands clenched at her sides. "That's what he does." Lily nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the window. Sophie had offered to go with him, to ride along, but Elias had shook his head with a gentle firmness. "Someone needs to stay with Lily. If it gets worse, she'll need you more than me." So she waited. She made tea she didn't drink, paged through Lily's coloring book without seeing the pages, checked the clock, checked her phone, checked the rain, again and again. At the garage, Elias waded waist-deep through water to reach the circuit breaker behind Millie's diner. His boots were soaked, his back ached, and his hands shook from cold. But when he finally got the water pumped out, and Millie pressed a warm towel into his hands with teary gratitude, he felt something more powerful than exhaustion: purpose. By nightfall, he was drenched, scraped up, and dog-tired. But people were safe, and when he finally pulled into the driveway, headlights slicing through the storm, Sophie ran out barefoot, rain soaking her hair, and threw her arms around him before he could even close the truck door. "You're freezing," she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her, holding tight. "I'm home." And for the first time, the storm didn't feel like the thing to fear. It felt like the thing they'd weather together. Elias slumped onto the front porch steps, rain still dripping from his hair, mud caked on his jeans, and a dull ache pulsing through every muscle in his body. The storm had slowed, but the air was thick with mist, and the scent of wet pavement and pine hung heavy in the night. He hadn't intended to stop, not yet. There were still neighbors without power, streets blocked by debris, but his hands had started to tremble behind the wheel, and his vision had blurred just enough to make him pull over, so he came home. The porch light flicked on. Sophie stepped outside, barefoot again, a thick wool blanket folded in her arms. She paused when she saw him, drenched, head down, his breath rising in shallow clouds. Without a word, she walked over and knelt beside him. "I told you I'd be fine," he murmured. She ignored him, draping the blanket over his shoulders, her hands lingering for just a second longer than necessary. "You're soaked and pale." "I'm tired," he admitted, "and cold, but everyone's okay. You didn't have to do it all yourself." He glanced at her then, and for the first time that night, he let himself lean into her touch, let the weight of the day settle somewhere other than his own back. She sat beside him on the steps, pulling the blanket tighter around him like she could somehow shield him from everything that had come before. Then, Without saying anything, Sophie reached behind her and held out something familiar, battered, slightly bent. The canvas stretched from age and memory. The umbrella. He stared at it for a moment, lips quirking despite himself. "You kept it." "Of course I did," she said. "It reminds me who you are." He took it slowly, his hand brushing against hers. "And now you're giving it back?" Sophie smiled, soft and steady. "You looked like you could use the cover this time." They sat there in the rain, blanket shared, umbrella resting between them, silence filled with more than words could say. It wasn't about shelter anymore. It was about choosing to stand beside someone, even when the storm had passed. And Elias, for the first time, let himself believe he didn't have to weather the world alone. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the hills beyond Riverbend. The storm had cleared days ago, leaving behind a quiet that felt earned, like the world was finally exhaling. In the gravel lot behind the garage, Elias stood beside a freshly polished motorcycle, its chrome glinting in the soft light, the scent of oil and leather lingering in the air. It wasn't new. In fact, it was the same rusted old frame that had been leaning against the back wall of the shop for years, abandoned, forgotten. But over the past few weeks, between jobs and long nights, Elias had restored it piece by piece, not because it needed to be fixed, because he needed something to give. Sophie arrived just as he'd asked. No questions, no expectations. She stepped out of her car in jeans and a denim jacket, hair tied back, eyes curious. When she saw the bike, her brow lifted. "This your idea of a date?" she asked. "Kind of," Elias said, walking toward her, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's not exactly dinner and champagne." Sophie looked from the bike to him. "I didn't fall for you because of champagne." He smiled, nerves flickering just beneath the surface. "I built it for you. Well, technically for us, for wherever we go next." Her gaze softened, the teasing edge giving way to something quiet and serious. "I don't have a ring," Elias said, "and I can't promise you a mansion or vacations in places with names I can't pronounce, but I can give you this." He gestured to the bike. "A ride, a seat next to me, a life that might be messy and loud and full of oil stains, but it'll be real. I love you, Sophie, and I want to build something that's ours. Just ride with me, wherever it goes." For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she stepped closer, slipping her arms around his waist. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me that my whole life," she whispered. He handed her a helmet. She took it without hesitation. And when they roared off down the open road, laughter trailing behind them like wind, there was no ring, no audience, no grand speech, just love, and the promise of every mile ahead. The motorcycle rumbled to a stop at the edge of a quiet overlook, just beyond the edge of town. The sky had turned a soft lavender, fading into deep blue with the first stars blinking awake above them. Elias cut the engine, the silence that followed so complete it felt sacred. Sophie slid off the seat behind him, pulling off her helmet and shaking out her hair. The wind had tangled it, but she didn't care. She wasn't thinking about the way she looked. She was thinking about how her heart still hadn't quite slowed down, not from the ride, but from the words Elias had spoken before it. She turned to him now, still seated on the bike, his eyes searching hers. "You didn't answer me," he said quietly, his voice barely louder than the breeze. She stepped closer, the gravel crunching softly beneath her boots. "You didn't ask me to marry you," she said with a small smile. "You just asked me to ride. I didn't think I had the right to ask for more." Sophie reached out, took his hand in both of hers. It was rough, calloused, strong. The hand of a man who had worked, who had struggled, who had given without ever asking anything in return. A hand that had held her together more than once without even realizing it. "You didn't have to offer more," she said, her voice steady. "Because I'm not saying yes to a ring or a house or a perfect life. I'm saying yes to you, to who you are when no one's looking, to how you raise Lily, to how you look at me like I'm not a Langston or a name, but just me." Elias opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat was too tight for anything but a breath that trembled. Sophie leaned forward, forehead resting gently against his. "So, yes," she whispered, "I'll ride with you, wherever this goes, rain or shine." He pulled her close, his arms around her like a shelter. Not a fortress, not a possession, just a place to belong. And for once, neither of them had to be anything other than exactly who they were. Together. A year later, the sign above the new building read, "Grant and Langston Auto, service you can trust." It wasn't flashy. No chrome lettering or backlit logos, just clean paint, solid wood, and Sophie's careful handwriting. Below it, in pastel chalk, Lily had drawn a bright sun, a rocket ship, and a bunch of crooked hearts surrounding the word open. The second garage was smaller than the original, but in a better part of town, tucked between a coffee shop and a hardware store. Locals stopped in just to say hello, even when they didn't need anything fixed. Word had spread about the honest work, the free first checkups for single parents, the woman behind the desk who smiled like she meant it and remembered your dog's name from last time. Inside, Elias wiped his hands on a clean towel, stepping back from the car lift with a satisfied nod. He didn't say much when the job was done, just smiled, handed over the keys, and got ready for the next one. His heart no longer raced with worry about overdue bills or broken equipment. There was still stress, sure, but now it came with a foundation beneath it, solid, earned. Sophie sat at the front desk, sorting invoices with Lily perched beside her, tongue between her teeth as she carefully colored in the corners of the chalkboard. She wore one of the oversized shop aprons now, covered in glitter and marker stains instead of oil, and insisted on being the official sign designer. "Can I put 'We love your car' on the board?" Lily asked. Sophie laughed. "That's a little much, don't you think? But we do love their cars, especially the one that smells like cookies." "Fine," Sophie said, handing her a blue chalk stick. "Make it sweet, not weird." From the back room, Elias watched them both, his daughter and the woman who had changed everything, not by sweeping in with money or promises, but by staying, by showing up. He walked out to the sidewalk, standing beneath their hand-painted sign, and breathed in the crisp air. This wasn't the life he'd dreamed of. It was better, not because it was easy, because it was real, and for the first time Elias Grant felt like the richest man in the world. The rain came soft and steady that afternoon, the kind that painted the streets in silver and made the air smell like earth and something new. It wasn't a storm, not this time. Just a gentle reminder that life didn't always need sun to feel full. Sophie stood at the front of the garage, watching droplets race each other down the window. Inside, Lily was organizing her chalks by color, humming a tune she'd made up on the spot, while Elias finished sweeping the bay floor, his sleeves rolled up, grease still smudged along his forearm. He glanced toward Sophie, and she met his eyes with a smile, small, content, the kind that didn't need words. "Want to take a walk?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "In the rain?" He shrugged, already reaching for the old umbrella leaning by the door. The same one he'd given her all that time ago, still bent at one rib, still doing its job. They stepped out together, the umbrella hovering between them, as they strolled through the sleepy streets of Riverbend. Shops glowed softly through their rain-speckled windows. A couple of locals waved as they passed, and Sophie waved back without hesitation. No one whispered anymore. No one asked what a Langston was doing here. She wasn't a Langston here, she was Sophie. They passed the corner where she'd first seen Elias, wet, quiet, steady. The bus stop was still there, but the old bench had been replaced. Funny how things changed and stayed the same. "I almost didn't stop that day," he said. "You didn't," she replied with a teasing grin. "You slowed down just enough to toss me an umbrella and disappear." He laughed, the sound low and warm. "And you almost didn't come back." "I didn't plan to." They paused beneath the awning of Millie's diner, the rain a soft curtain around them. Sophie leaned into him, her fingers laced with his. "Do you think," she asked, "if we had missed each other that day, life would have just kept going?" "Probably," he said, "but it wouldn't have been this life." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I'm glad you stopped." Elias kissed her forehead, the umbrella sheltering them both. "Rain or shine," he whispered, "I always will." And with that they stepped back into the drizzle, two hearts, one shared umbrella, and a love born from the simplest act of all, kindness.